How about some more stripping? Consider that the ordinary productive workings of the mind always result in moving things around out there. Don't tell me you ever thought of that. Life wouldn't let anybody think about that. Whereas, what we have been pleased to call revolutionist thinking for a second is really to move things about in your own mind, in your own intelligence. But now consider all of the great aspects, odes, imaginations, things written about the human intellect. And it even writes about itself, of course, being the father of self-reference. And nobody ever thinks about if I presented this more as a rhetorical question to start with and gave any sort of leeway about what sorts of things can the mind do. People would start to say things like, well, the mind can write great literature besides trash. It can create great art. It can have wonderfully deep philosophical thoughts, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I'm not saying it can't. That's not the point. The productive workings of the ordinary mind are to move things around. The end result of ordinary thinking is at the fingertips of man. And if you think otherwise, you're missing it. Even when it gets to what would appear to be the world of the intellect, science. There is no demand for science unless it is applicable. Oh, I know that there are people who will say that they're sitting around playing with theoretical physics to the point that they're into 117 dimensions mathematically, and as far as they can see, it has no application. Please note, those people are not in demand. I mean, they may have another job. They may be working at Burger Doodle on the side, or they may be teaching, but that sort of theoretical science is not the raison d'etre of a viable use of the human intellect. The human intellect can seem to be, I don't have to do it, people before me, they have written all sorts of praises to the human intellect, the fire in a great thinker's eyes, or some artistic person. And, of course, since the brain is here, people think of the intellect. The thinker wrote down, they always show the shot if they're not going to do the whole thing. It's always, his face and the guy thinking. The end result, the productive end result at the ordinary level, the human intellect, does not come out of the brain, does not come out of the mouth, does not come out of the eyes, it comes out of the fingertips. Because it was not productive, ordinary work. It is not the intellect fulfilling its purpose unless whatever was thought ends up coming out of the fingertips, that is, that somebody reaches over and moves something, rearranges something, builds something new, changes the rocket fuel, changes the rocket structure, changes the program. That is the ordinary purpose of the intellect. Everything else, anything else you can find an exception in, which, as I said, there can be. There's no doubt that there are people who, even at the ordinary level, can play around with, stay with the example, I guess is easy enough, of theoretical physics or mathematics, that as far as let's assume that they're correct, that right now in their lifetime it has no practical application, then it will stay a hobby. They do not give awards. It is just not part of the mainstream of human life. And I'm aware of the fact, or I've read, that there are even those who have such hobbies that will say, now that is the pure science. Is science that even has no application. And I understand why they say that. You should be able to understand that. But they have to even draw the distinction themselves. It is like a kid almost saying, well, I know you're not going to like what I'm about to do. I don't mean that they understand it, but they even, the wired system of the human brain, the human nervous system, is to the point that they understand that this is fooling around. Here I am paid by Cray or IBM, and I should be doing something, or Harvard, and I should be working hard, but this stuff I've been doing that I now can mathematically, and forget those guys over at Princeton, I can now play around. I can show you mathematically, if you can understand, I can show you now the mathematical reality of 207 dimensions. But they always have to say something, because without them understanding, they know that this is not the proper use of the brain. They understand it's a hobby. They understand it's like taking an unauthorized coffee break. That I should be in there being able to build a better computer, a new program, because it is the fingertips. That is the end result in the ordinary world of the human mind. Anything else is strictly a hobby. Anything else is almost, if you understand it, I just want to make sure you catch what I'm trying to point to, is almost anomalous. That it does not fit into the mainstream, and it's just people fooling around. It's stuff they're doing in their coffee break. So although this seems to be, and it is from a certain level, the crowning glory of human existence and how it can deal with the infinite and imagine all sorts of things, and it does. But the imagination, the things it imagines, the things that it theorizes about, if it does not result in a human hand reaching out there in what appears to be life, out there in the 3D spatial, tangible world, and moving something about, it was not a productive act of the human intellect. The only exception to this, which of course is not an exception at the city level because it's irrelevant, is doing this sort of stuff. Those of you that would care to make any passing observation of the fact, if you do get a glimpse before we're through tonight, that it is really this kind of stuff that is outside of a hobby with ordinary people. It is only this wherein the intellect is actually not engaged, and the definition of profitability is not in moving things around out there, but is in moving things around in here. Then understand this is not tangible. And when I say moving around in here, it does not necessarily result in someone doing this, writing a book, which would be a tangible result. You've got to understand that if somebody came up with new thinking in such a way that seemed to be completely theoretical or seemed to have no immediate value, and they could yet write a book and it sell, you do understand it came out of their fingertips again. It hit the typewriter, it hit the pen, then you bought it, you're holding it. It is almost unknown. It is not tangible, it is certainly not spatial, and it is not tied to moving things around out there. And what I was going to say that you might care to take note of, after that distinction, can you see what a short, teensy-weensy stuff it is from there to the idea of secret societies, secret knowledge, that there are people somewhere engaged in just unbelievable, some kind of brainstorming, or they're in touch with certain cosmic forces that the rest of us don't know about, and they're able to think about things that, ooh, I don't even want to think about it. They're just thinking about things that would astound us. Do you see what a short step it is to having that kind of imagination, because on the basis that if the human intellect could do, if it were permitted to do on a wide range what people imagine it would do, that is, just operate for its own pleasure, other than the fact that I'm telling you, the real nerve endings of the human neural system are not in here. They're right there at your fingertips. That is the human intellect right now. But the dream that it could be otherwise is the dream of hermits, the dreams of Zen schools, the dreams of old men sitting around in the snow and not moving for years and just thinking. Do you understand, though, what a short step it is, that since ordinary men are not wired up to do this, then the idea is, if this is possible, it's secret. And all they're saying is, without knowing it, it is non-tangible. It shows no object at the end of the action. That there the men sit, these great statues of Buddhas and Hindu gods, or just a picture of some old guru sitting up in Tibet for years, just sitting there until his bones atrophy and he grows together, because what they're imagining is thinking without it going through the fingertips. And that is not the way life is arranged. That is not the current purpose of the human intellect. I would like to ask, I feel like I'm taking I got a sip of something. Think about 1 second. Well, I mean him to beat you over the head, because you never think in this way. You would think that, well, sure, things in life, you have technology and you have business and you have construction. And, of course, you've got to think. Even a carpenter's got to measure and he's got to... But that the intellect in worlds of science and other places, philosophy and this and that there is a place wherein there is no actual tangible result. No, no, no. So you just always thought that. Well, you didn't even think you thought it. But if I'd asked you point blank, you'd have said, well, sure. There's things that happen that's of supreme importance, world-shaking, historical importance that happen in men's intellect that have nothing to do with actual, physical, material movements. How wrong can one person be? Well, not wrong enough. It takes a lot of people to be wrong enough. That's why there's more than one of us. It is of no consequence, even if it is philosophy, unless it moves things. That is, you would not remember an Aristotle, you would not remember a Socrates unless, and it seemed like he wasn't measuring anything, he wasn't doing anything, but he talked and he made people. What he was saying made people move around. As it turned out, from one view, not to his benefit. There is no such thing as why this is popular. It's, I think, from the Old Testament in your part of the world, but it's in other areas, about a voice in the wilderness, or a prophet with no honor, a prophet with no audience is what they're saying, and that's what I was referring to earlier as a solo dancer. If a man, let's say, I'm playing with relative, but let's say it's somebody somewhere, in some way got plugged in to real kind of plain thinking, or had just astounding ideas, and nobody ever listened to them. Now, I'm playing with reality because how are we going to say they were astounding? Let's assume they were. And nobody would ever listen to them. He tried to get somebody to listen. They might as well not exist. They are not profitable. They are not productive. And I don't care if you or one or two people heard them somewhere, especially later, is normally where this shows up, after the person's dead. You think, Jesus, boy, what a mistake they made. They should have been listening to that guy. That's easy to say later. If he had no audience, if he had no dancing partner, it was not productive results of the human intellect. I don't care how, because it's changed if you're seeing it 10 years later or 50 years later. It could then be having an apparent effect. But at the time, if the output of the human intellect does not result in the movement of stuff, swords, bows and arrows, rocks, people, spaceships, convicts, politicians, shoe leather. It was not productive. And when I say productive, what I mean is life is not going to have any particular notice of it. It is just a passing rude noise in the night. It's somebody saying, hey, Mac, do you know what time it is? 2:30, thanks. And that's it. The secondary world of man is only wired up and primed to neurally process energy for tangible results. Anything else is strictly a hobby, and it is, as you should be able to note, even if we could call it a hobby, that there's somebody sitting around playing with ideas that have no productive value to life, they may enjoy it. It's not of our concern. I'm all in favor of everybody enjoying their hobby. And they may be really enjoying this. But that is not the basic wiring and primed system of the human intellect. It is to produce spatial, tangible movement in the secondary world. Now you might notice again that if we could separate in some way man and more or less have him as he is, or at least talk about him, and then stick him back at the primary level, you do understand it doesn't even require any sort of thought to begin with. Now, expand that is grown from the primary, and from that, grafted onto it, still a part of it, becomes the secondary world. You don't catch the hint? Was that too crude? You do not need to think to exist at the primary level. Even a man would not. Nowadays there would be no call for you on this planet. Unless they were going to use you as a doorstop. There is no demand for a man who cannot think. That is, with a brain that is not fired up, putting out the right chemicals and got the right voltage to it. And on that basis, which should be clear enough, that you do not have to think to operate, to live at the primary level, then you not see it becomes a secondary world, and it's only then that the operations of the brain have any importance, because you would not have to be able to think to exist at the primary level. You just simply would not. You could exist as well, everything else being equal, as your dog could if you threw him out in the wilds. You do not have to think about anything. So then, that which is overlooked, I'm just sort of backing up, the thoughts of man would seem to be, from certain views of people who are just sort of led up to this in a naive way, seems to have, such greater importance. That, the reason we're not simply primary animals, some religious people would still say, is that the gods intended so much more for us, that we're such a singular creature in the universe, and that we have the intellect so that we do not have to just simply grovel around and looking for grubs and sucking on bark and rooting around with our sexual partners like a bunch of hairy warthogs, that it's this that raises us up to higher levels. The level does not get any higher than this. They can dream all sorts of things, but life is not using it, and there will be no particular notice of it at that time, unless whatever these great thoughts that are far above simply screwing and eating and defecating and getting out of the rain and killing each other. Oh, now we're into the worlds of Mozart, Da Vinci, maybe James Joyce, I don't know. They say that. But notice, that does not exist. None of what I mentioned exists without this, without back to that which is inseparable to the primary level, because you could not keep the race alive, of course, without your body. There is the output of the human intellect at the secondary level. It is so plain, it is so obvious if you can see it, that it should give you a chill down to your underwear. There's no exception to it. And all the theories in the world about art, literature, philosophy, religious thought, is like a hobby upon a hobby. Because the reality of it is that none of that will exist in any particular case until it comes out of the fingertips of some human, from a Mozart, from a Da Vinci, from an Aristotle. Until it comes out of there, until something has moved around, a quill that Homer says, well, I believe I'll write a bit, since I hear I'm unemployed. He has to move something. He has to take a quill in hand, or a chisel, you move things in the tangible, spatial world, or else whatever the intellect was doing is not productive work, and it really will make no impact. It will not be recorded in the general consensus, the general consciousness of humanity at that time. It is simply whatever happens is somebody's little hobby. Then consider the strangeness, if you need to, any further, of doing such as this when it is, in a sense, action here that is in, at least verbally speaking, in the 3D world, direct opposition to what we just pointed out. That there is no object in mind. It is not no matter what you think to begin with, that you were hoping to get involved with such as this and miraculously make your nose straighten out or get smaller, or you to get better looking. It is to move things around, not out there, but inside of your own intelligence. That, comparably speaking to the first part, that could be said to be the beginning and the end of the strangeness of what this is. Because it has, in a sense, no practical application right now in anybody's lifetime. If we were back in 450 and we were all sitting around talking about this, it would still be true that whatever it was, whatever form, whatever verbal maps would be that we were using then, it would still have no practical application. It would not be headed toward an output of some sort of work energy having to do with the movement of stuff out there. It's not. Because if it was, then it would be ordinary. If it was, then there would be a big demand for it. If it was, it wouldn't be this. It is to move, rearrange, move about stuff in the individual's intellect, but not to move stuff around out there. As much as is possible in a more complex world to even verbally talk about it, I can say that that is a line, that is no man's land, that is the line that cannot be crossed. That ordinary thought, but just what people call their ordinary thinking process, the operations of the brain, if it does not result in something being moved about, it was wasted. Life will not tolerate it, it is inefficient, it is simply not the norm. And regardless of whether you can ever use this, I'm not saying it's not of any use, but you need to see that that is not in any way the purpose, that it is running in a different way. Even calling, as ordinary people would, an end result of neural activity, to call it knowledge, and to say, well, it does, that knowledge is not a moving about of something, that knowledge is really something. Knowledge, since people have studied just to gain knowledge and education, is in contradistinction to what you just said, and it's not. Because what people call knowledge will not even live up to its name. People won't even think to call it knowledge unless it will move something about. Do we have to get more subtle? I already threw it in whether you're listening or not. What if it's knowledge? What if somebody says, two real smarty pants people, guys with college educations and stuff, in the world of science, and one physicist meets another one at a convention, and he says, after studying your latest theory, the one in which you won the Nobel Prize, I would like to tell you, I can show you right here. Now he's going to talk about knowledge. He said, in fact, listen to me. Perhaps they can speak mathematically in a complex and lengthy manner that one can listen to the other, and this man gives him the new knowledge that he has that denies this guy's famous theory. Now, ordinary intelligence might say, ordinary thinking might say, well, wait a minute. That belies what you said, because it's not moving things around. El wrongo. If it's going to come out as knowledge, that ordinary people would say, well, this is knowledge, and this is not a movement of people or stuff around. This is knowledge for its own sake. This is the true operations of the human intellect, which you just said ordinary people don't do. If it is going to be accepted as knowledge, in the widest sense of the word, do you understand that the recipient of this knowledge is going to be moved by it? He can agree, he can disagree, he can say, wait a minute, that's your theory. Don't call it knowledge, that's your theory, and I got to go away and think about it, because I'm not sure you're correct. He got moved. Or he can say, oh my God, I never realized that. The flaw in my theory. Ooh. It moves stuff in the tangible world. That currently is the end product. It is the productive work. It is the acceptable, the basic purpose of the human intellect. Not to think. Not in some theoretical sense. Not anything resembling the sense that we have been trying to distinguish between calling thinking and knowledge. That is not the purpose currently of the human brain. If anybody needs anything else, because I'm not an expert by any means, but I get the general impression for years and years and years and years and years that that's what now that science fiction is up to. It used to be called other stuff. But the stories are the little stuff I keep up with, or see. The dreams are what? You guys that keep up with this, you don't seem to recognize it. The dreams of all, the movie or TV or book starts out, it's the year 3750 when the human brain is now at some astounding level. And every time I try these, and I'll go, all right, and I'll start reading. In the first sentence, when they say that and they've set you up, the second sentence, they start describing what? And they don't realize it. They start describing the operations that everybody thinks the brain does now. They just change the description. They change the time. They say, well, it's now 1,500 years in the future. Oh. And then what do? They describe the operations of the human brain as people imagine, such as imagining that the brain can work in such a way that, for instance, that a man can look at something like an equation that he doesn't like and make it change on the paper. Or the great old idea, they changed the term of this, but this is thousands of years old, that one guy can look at another one and make him float or disappear. Like that is the great breakthrough of the brain. What are they talking about? All they're doing is trying to take away what I'm telling you, the fingertips. But they're still moving stuff around in the world. It's just now they think, or their description about them analyzing this way, that the major breakthrough is that you can now kill people with your mind. So they've taken away the middleman. I'm telling you that in the secondary world, the operations of the brain is to move stuff around, and it comes out of the fingertips to clutch something and stab a guy. So they say it's now the year 3255, and people no longer have to let the brain come to viable, useful consequences through the fingertips. Nah, a man can now put his hands behind his back and look at his fellow man and go, and kill him. But you don't hear? It's still moving stuff around. They're just trying to remove the fingertips. That's their breakthrough. I'm not picking on science fiction in case you don't see it. That is also the basis of, where it's at the heart. I don't mean the basis, but it's the heart of one way to see what religion dreams of what gods would be, what Superman would be. Same thing. They're trying to remove the middleman, sometimes known as life. Like, boy, just think how great we'll be after we're dead. Well, surely you see it, but all the religions in some form or the other, paradise, which is a form of 3525 or whatever it is, the science fiction of the future. Paradise will be in such a place that whatever your little mind, I guess they might say heart, that your little mind or heart desires, you can have it. But since you please the gods and you're now in paradise, you don't even have to be so crude as to use your own fingertips to get it, because there'll be angels and little dwarfs and people to wait on you. Now, boy, that's a major breakthrough. And that certainly makes what I'm telling you just runs it all. Instead of your fingertips, they're now replacing it. The Muslims are great at that. Islam is all the wonders of paradise. When they get more specific than Western religion, that it's all pomegranates and beautiful women, and well, of course they don't drink. But at any rate, all of that. But paradise, you don't have to go over there and pick the fruit. Somebody brings it to you. That is your reward for living the life of an upright Muslim. And you don't have to go out and rape a woman or grab her and say, "Come here, bitch." You just lay there and your mind, your heart says, "Allah, I want a woman." And suddenly, one just springs on you. It has not changed what I'm telling you is human consciousness, as the operations of the brain, is for one purpose, and man cannot even in any useful way imagine otherwise yet, that it is to move stuff around, out there, not in here. Art is not in some way, although they're talking about the future, but art is not in some way to enrich men's souls. Philosophy is not to in some way clear men's minds. Because if any of this, if art, religion, literature, philosophy, if it does not result in stuff getting moved around out there, it's non-existent. It's a noise in the night. It's you snoring for just a second, and then it's all gone. That's all it is. But notice, the great dreams. Notice it. In other words, we could not peddle this. I don't know what night you think we could, but we certainly couldn't peddle this out in the city. Especially the intelligent, sophisticated people, because it sounds as though, from one view, that this is just a direct denial of the glory of the human spirit. I'm using their kind of terms. I don't mean that. But the beauty, the direct singularity of the human mind, or as I said, they might want to say the soul or the spirit. And it's not. It's simply pointing out the obvious, which is not supposed to be obvious. That there is no such thing as great literature, much less poor literature, but great literature, as they'd say, or great art, high fashion, Beaux-Arts. None of it exists. None of it is productive work until it comes out of the fingertips and moves stuff around out there. And they can talk forever, which is part of the efficiency, the way life is still operated in man. They can talk forever about the theoretical glories, the secret internal joys of thinking philosophical thoughts, dreaming of the pictures I may paint, of hearing the music that I could almost write if goddamn Brahms hadn't been born first and wrote it all. If I can hear all this. You can say all that, but it does not really exist. I mean, if a guy who never wrote a symphony, in no way we would know that he has heard all this great music. In some way, he has been genetically wired up that at times, like on Tuesdays, he hears the kinds of stuff that either Brahms already wrote or would have written if he lived longer or died earlier. And then on Thursday, he hears the kind of stuff that Buxtehude was playing and perhaps could have surpassed Bach if he'd lived longer or died sooner. A man can say all this and you can say, wait a minute, there's the kind of operations that deny what you're saying, because there's the beauty of the human soul, spirit, and mind operating alone for its own purpose. Now I'd have to say, well, how did you know about this? Well, I read in the book the guy wrote. It's not a game. I wasn't trying to trick you, but that is it. You understand? Even someone who says otherwise, someone who says that their life is proof otherwise of what I'm telling you, how would you know it? Unless it moves something around out here, you wouldn't know about it. That's the beauty of the good stuff. Forget John Keats. The beauty of the good stuff is there is no way out. It's not that beauty is a joy forever, it's that this kind of stuff can't get itself. Yeah, wait a minute. All right, I'll figure it out. I'll get it later. I'll get it. I'll get you. All right, okay. We'll change the subject. I don't know it gets confusing. I started to say, I know it gets confusing, but say, I don't know that. There is a myth about another one. It's not the same old one, a new one. It's a myth about which little can be said, but much suspected. So get ready to suspect, because I'm just going to say a little. The myth, and I'm bringing this one in from a good ways out, I got to tell you, but I mean, I don't mind. I already had my feet wet, so. This myth, this is from another, so you'd call it a place. Okay. The myth says that in the beginning, but in this other place they call it the real beginning. I guess you might want to call it was the beginning of the beginning. It's beyond anything you've ordinarily heard, just trust me, I can't prove it. But the myth at this other place says that in the real beginning, as men became intellectually conscious, they had nothing to ask. But as soon as the answer was given, the question started. Come on, think about it. I know it's insane. Well, at least it's non sequitur. But consider, because this is their myth at another place, that you have man, and here he is, he's reached the point of being, I'm just using our kind of terminology, I had to translate it, that man has become conscious. Adam and Eve, the archetypicals. But there they are, conscious, and they had nothing to ask. Until the answer, now you just fill it in, whatever, the answer, I'm talking about in quotation marks with a capital T and a capital A. The answer. Once that was given, then it was the ungodly, unholy, floodgates are open, and the question started. This could be a poster boy for a non sequitur, couldn't it? I just repeat them. I don't make them up. I just bring them to you. That nobody had anything to ask until the answer. Am I making it clear enough? The answer is like the answer to everything. What? I don't care what. The answer. But if this is sounding too... Let's put it another way. If man, I'm using man now applying to their myth, if man was not destined, was not wired up, was not three-dimensionally destined to be forever curious and in doubt, then, according to this kind of myth, then the gods made a mistake to have ever spoke to him. Come on, think about it. Since it has nothing to do with myths and gods and all that. But think, all the other myths, every myth on this planet that has anything to do with creation and gods and all that, which most of them do, whether you see it or not. But all of them, the myths actually start. That's why this myth says the real beginning. As far as the myths on this planet and the three dimensions are concerned, the myths, that is the beginning, only starts when? Well, now, like the Old Testament and some of the Hindu stories, they can say what the gods were up to before man, but who cares? Nobody reads that crap. And that's why I don't know how many pages in the Old Testament, but, the first part before Adam and Eve is what? A tenth of a page or some little crap like, God did all this and created all that, and yeah. Because everybody wants to get to the good part. When did we show up? Who cares? When does the real history of man start, even mythically, religiously? When? It's when the gods speak to him. They create him. They can say that. Did they make him? They turn him into a doughboy or some kind of little... Well, they create this thing. The gods create elephants and warthogs and stuff, and then they say, well, let's make man. And so they do that, and it's still no big deal. Until... What? Until the God, the creator, the head guy, speaks to him. It's only then that he becomes man. That he speaks to him, and Adam goes, what? But now back to the beginning of the myth. Well, I don't know. What else would he have said? You know? I wasn't going for a cheap laugh. I just thought, well, there he stands. Right, go from that back to the opening of the myth. Consider, you got to stretch reality enough, but if you can think it all, you can start to do it on your own. There was no question of any kind until, I'm still using ordinary terminology, till the gods spoke to man. But when the gods spoke to man, there was the answer. No matter what local myth you subscribe to or grew up with, Jewish or Christian or Hindu or whatever, that was the answer. The answer originally was, hey, you are a thinking creature. That was the answer. But as soon as the God spoke and gave the answer, that's everything. As soon as the God spoke and Adam went, what? That was the answer. He acknowledged that now I know it all except for this. It was only then they start all the, wait a minute, and then you just start filling it in. Who said that? Where are you? Are you talking to me? Would you repeat that? What should I make of this? Did you hear that? Where did you come from? Where are my clothes? How did I get here? But notice, if you can hear, this is not just metaphorical. It was only when the answer was given that the question started. Now, if I wanted to be really metaphorical, then I could try and lead you around, which I can for a second, because you can get somewhere. It's like going on a merry-go-round, but as soon as you get back to where you started, jump, mothers, jump. Don't stay there on that horse. But it's like you could now see that the intellect, if I wanted to be this kind of crudely metaphorical, I could say that now the purpose of the intellect, of course, this is back to the old thing about trying to reclaim paradise. I could say now that what the intellect's trying to do is in some way strip itself back down to the point to get rid of all this superfluous garbage type inquiries and get back to the answer. If it was the answer is what caused the confusion, then hey, the purpose of human life, the purpose in trying to be a good Christian or Jew or Buddhist, is to get back to the point that we in some kind of childlike naivete could actually know the answer and understand what life was about, and now we've got loaded down with all these damn questions that don't amount to crap. Doesn't that sound great? Sound like San Francisco circa 1955. Sound like Athens, Greece, circa 350 BC. Sounds like your family reunion last week. Because it is not simply a going back, but I repeat the myth and what I was started out tonight for a reason. That it is only once you got to really consider the pregnant possibilities. It's not a local matter when I'm calling the answer. Just fill it in, the answer. The answer. Until man was given the answer, there was nothing to ask. The answer was the progenitor. It spawned every question. There is also a myth of another place that's not too far removed from where I got that one that maybe I'll throw in. I'm not going to tell you the whole myth, but there's a curious part of it that's not unrelated to this. This other place's myth having to do with this, well, I'm going to make it have to do with it, about man being spoken to by the great forces, by something higher than himself, something more complex, the gods. The myth of this other place, not too far removed from the original myth, homeland, says that the gods only spoke to creation, to their man. It only spoke to him at all through his blood. Well, we don't have long, so let's really get. The kinds of things we've been talking about for the last few weeks. It could be said, assuming you followed just the general verbal landscape of it, There could be said that you are making some sort of movement in a non-linear direction, I guess, of progress, to be able to begin to perceive life as processes instead of things, to see it as ongoing activity rather than conclusions. There is, over the hill, around the corner, close to these places where I get these myths, there is something else, though. If you'd like to grab your ankles. There is a way, if you could think, sort of plainly and directly without the benefit of knowledge. There is a way to go beyond that. There is a way in which you can intellectually see at another level now, it's not the merry-go-round back where it started, that you can actually see processes as things. Maybe grabbing your ankles won't help, but may I suggest this? May I suggest to you that this is the basis of some men that seem to be in, well, I just do it, I just tell you, of some men historically claiming to have actually seen God. Now, I don't mean that the ones that said it understood it because they began to move things, or if they didn't do it themselves, it happened later. Did everybody follow where I was doing this wrap-up? That there is no doubt I wasn't being coy. To begin to see instead of conclusions, instead of things, instead of nouns, to begin to see that life, just at the ordinary level, if you're going to have any perception of life that is beyond what it is now, if there is any way to understand anything in you, if there's anything to do with your intellect that is more fun than you might have, as Pope Leonard pointed out about another part of your body, that they asked me not to repeat that, but he said it. If you're going to do anything, then you have to, at least initially, you have to be able to look out at life and not see things, not see conclusions, because as long as you do that, you're your brother's keeper. You are your brother. You are committed to suicide. That everything is reaching episodic proportions, and it's the half hour or the hour, and phew, thank God it's over with. Now that I understand that, well, of course I don't understand it, but now that I'm sick of it, now that I've come to the end of this sentence, now that this day is over, now that I can die and be reborn again through no effort of my own, simply takes an alarm clock. That kind of episodic, ordinary existence, to get past that, you have to see, even if it's just a split second. That can be enough. That this, taking life as being things, taking people as being things, stable, conclusive entities, no wonder I didn't understand anything. They are open-ended, ongoing processes. That is life, which is the great, from one view, the immediate, forget religious ideas, but the bone-shattering fear from a certain way of death, because that's the closest, without being able to analyze it, that men actually do begin to resemble a stable entity. The rest of it is processes, and it is non-ending, and so you've got to be able to see that. But I'm telling you, you could look at that as being sort of a verbal wrap-up. That once you can begin to see processes, let's make it a quick, play a game like a little, some sort of lecture series, that if you can begin to see life and people, not as things, but as processes, then you're on to something. Thank you so much. Thank you. Appreciate your attention. I hope that's, and you could go, hey, now that I can do that, I'm better off. All right. Now come back. Now, all right, now for the graduate work. There is a way to intellectually see. You can't do it. There's no way to fake it, and there's no way that you're going to make your ordinary intellect do it now, because it deals in knowledge, which is a thing, which is conclusive, and which is an anathema to plain thinking, to revolutionist thinking, to this kind of stuff, whatever the hell it is. So that's a verbal wrap to say, well, now I can see. I can think more of life and people as being processes and things. Okay, good. Right, there's your BA degree. All right, now come back. There is a way that you can actually see beyond that the processes as things. And the best example, I'll do it one more time, some of you kind of got a thrill, if not a chill. I was suggesting to you that that is the basis of otherwise fairly reliable reports throughout history of men who said, or claimed to have said, that they actually saw God, which would be the ultimate process, of course, actually saw him. You know, forget they saw him and said, you know, what was he like? And guy said, oh, he's about a 42 long. They didn't see him like that. They were able to see, I'm suggesting to you, at another level, processes, the ultimate process, to actually see it as a thing. Run that Rod Serling music. Bring it up. One other little thing that I kept wanting to bring out that might be of some practical value for some of you, having to do with knowledge and thinking and etc. And that is all grievous emotions. And I got my own grievous emotions. I mean anything that seems to be self-directed, self-referring, and it is negative. I leave it to you. But all grievous emotions are products of knowledge. Of knowledge. And again, you're faced with trying to, if you're following in a certain way of trying to see that we're equating many times what appears to be verbs with nouns, which can be done. You might think that grievous emotion, since they've got to play along with the mind somewhere, you got to think about it, you can't be grieving, that it is an ongoing process, that it is thinking, and it's not. It's knowledge, because it is a continual rereading of that which you already know, or you can't grieve. You can't, and by grieving, every form, guilt, shame, self-pity, desire for revenge, anything that is self-directed and to you is negative is a grievous emotion, but it has nothing to do with thinking. It has no connection to that great possible royal line, royal family of actual plain thinking. It is from knowledge. It is from local city knowledge, because it is a continual rereading of that which you already know. That's the only way you can grieve. That's the only way that you can feel sorry for yourself. We're not talking about primary, if you've broken your foot or that you were born with a genetic flaw that you may ache. I'm talking about grievous human emotion. It is all a continual rereading. You got to be sitting at the local position within your own neural system. You got to be back at the city. And you have got to be taking knowledge as being things. You have got to continually reread the past. You've got to run it back through that which you know, not what you think, because thinking would destroy this. It interfered with it so bad that you couldn't properly suffer. I'll put it to you that way. That is why the classic cases of people trying to show real grievous emotion, actors, what they do. Or if you're trying to fool your mother when you were a kid, you get that glaze. So they're going to show somebody grieving. You know? Some Shakespearean character, you look off, or you look down. I mean, if they're going to try to show a good camera shot, if it's a movie that you're grieving, how is it? You may stare, but then just slightly. If you're really, I guess, a method actor, is maybe your eyeballs just a little bit, kind of, they shift just a little, as though you're what? Well, it's sort of reading, kind of, thinking that you just found out that your uncle has killed your father. And you're thinking, what in the hell am I doing in Hamlet? But at any rate, but you really grieve, there you are. And the camera gets up close, and if you're really good, the eyes just dark just a little bit. And what are you doing? You're rereading knowledge. You are not thinking. Grievous emotions are a local phenomenon. They are not primary. And when I say local phenomenon, they are in the city of the head. And of course, they're real enough. They're as real as Uncle Freud was. They're as real as volumes are. Well, hell, they're more real than that. But you have got to reread knowledge. You're not engaged in some form of thinking. Whereas I'm just going to point out that just at a very crude, immediate level, ordinary brains would say otherwise. Because they would say, wait a minute, I know what you're saying. You're saying that when you're grieving or worrying about the way your first wife treated you or that somebody cheated you, you're saying that you think about it. Well, sure you think about it. Isn't that what you said? And I said, no. Well, yeah, you do. If I was thinking about how somebody really cheated me, not that I approve of this, but that's what annoys me is I keep thinking about it. That's not thinking. Well, yeah, it is. I mean, I think about, believe me, I do, because I remember when he said, hey, you can trust me. After all, I'm your uncle. And so I gave him all my money. And that's thinking, yeah. Because every time I even hear somebody whose initials start with an A, I think of him. And I think about it, he says, you can trust me, I'm your uncle. So that's thinking, yes. I think about it all the time. I'm not saying that it's good for me, but I think about it all the time. You're wrong. That is saying to me, I'm not. That is not thinking. Grievous emotions are a product. They are an output of knowledge. All human suffering, not primary, but all the human suffering, the psychological problems of man, comes from knowledge. Whereas some of you might be aware that there have been humans on this planet who said almost the opposite. That the way out of all human suffering is knowledge. Of course, there was a basis for that. They didn't understand it. But to take literally what they said, wrong-o. They chose the wrong door. They're going to get a date with Monty Hall's brother who dresses funny. Because they're not going to win the prize. It is not human knowledge. Of course, they're saying something else. What they're saying is, if men could think, if they could think in contradistinction to having to reread what they know and just revise it, then maybe we wouldn't suffer as much. Of course, that's assuming that you're not supposed to suffer, bunko. Trouble was, the God spoke, and your forefathers went, huh? And it was all over. Speaking of all over, how's this for an exit? I guess it's all over.